Welcome to Goshen Prepping. The economy is, for some people it's in really good shape. Not you and me, but corporations are flourishing because of all the things that's happened over the past few years. Let's jump right into some articles. I want to show you what's going on. From the Washington Post, consumer credit is soaring in the U.S. So what? We've talked about this before. Americans have driven up their credit balances at a record pace this year. The doomsayers, like Goshen Prepping, say this clearly shows that households are struggling in the face of higher rates of inflation since the early 80s and have no choice but to go into debt to make ends meet. And that's so true. We've talked about this before. The biggest thing is people are starting to use debt to buy things you normally should not use for credit cards, like just essentials, groceries and such. First, consider revolving credit, like credit cards. That form of credit contracted dramatically early in the pandemic as consumers had fewer options to spend. They really couldn't go shopping. And the stimulus checks helped them pay down balances. Now, consumers are mostly playing catch up as the amount of revolving credit outstanding remains below the pandemic trend line. And here it is. Of course, many lower income households are suffering from the spike higher prices and are being forced to reach for their credit cards. But there's no sign of debt problem brewing broadly that could damage the economy. Oh, I get it. Even though a huge chunk of Americans, and people worldwide, mind you, are having a hard time paying for groceries, have to use credit cards, well, the economy is doing fine. What kind of logic is that? But here's what I want to get to. Non-revolving credit is a slightly different story. That's mostly education and car loans, but also financing for other big-ticket items like boats and trailers, etc. That category has seen a pandemic-era expansion that exceeds trends, and cars, which account for 39% of non-revolving credit, and 30% of consumer credit, seems to be the culprit. They say chalk that up to extraordinary run-up in car prices in 2021 and perhaps to some degree the extra interest in car ownership due to public health concerns. And they are right in one point for the fact that during the pandemic, cars were becoming a hot commodity. Good luck finding one. And people went out and tried to buy cars wherever they could. The new cars weren't coming in because factories were shut down. Well, and here we are today. Lastly, in this article, if there was a cause for concern in consumer credit data, it would be found in this non-revolving credit section. And long story short, here we are. People have maxed out credit cards trying to pay for, again, just simply things like groceries and other stuff they may need to do, like maybe repairs on the house. And now they've hit a situation where they need to buy a car, perhaps a new car. And the new car prices have gone out of control. This article doesn't talk about that. They talk about non-revolving credit, like buying cars, has really gone way up. Maybe it's for the fact that cars are so expensive now, or all this climate change stuff put out is trying to get people to get rid of their older cars, their gas cars, and buy electric cars. And with that, this article, GM unveils the whopping price of their flagship electric vehicle for 2024. And before I jump into this, I want to say, obviously you can get some electric vehicles for I'm scared to say the word, a decent price. I mean, they're still expensive. They're still new cars, but wait till you see what this new electric vehicle for GM costs. While electric vehicles are clearly the way of the future, they're pushing that, aren't they? In the automotive industry, many begrudge just how expensive these vehicles can be. And some of them can get pretty pricey. So the news about this GM's flagship is going to make you gasp. Ready for this? So the vehicle in question is called the Cadillac Celestiq, originally announced in fall of 2022. And at the time, they didn't announce the price, but now they do. $340,000 before options. You heard that. This GM, this Cadillac, cost $350,000 for a car, for an electric car. The internet could not believe how expensive this car is going to be. GM is trying hard to position all their brands as luxury brands, and they're going to fail massively because of this. I love this. I know beauty is an eye of the beholder, but my eyes are bleeding right now. $340,000. Now, I'll say it again. That's their flagship. I mean, even if I had that kind of money, even if I was a multimillionaire, I wouldn't blow my money on a car for that much money. I'd still buy a meager car. Now, again, there's a lot of electric cars you can get. They're not ridiculously priced like this. But when it comes to them pushing away gas cars and trying to bring in electric cars, of course, I already talked about, mind you, that let's raise the gas prices more and more and more and more, purposely orchestrated. Well, that makes it so people want to buy electric cars. But there's a lot of costs involved, not just the car. And by the way, in that particular car, every year you have to replace the batteries, and that's another $25,000. A lot of people for electric cars don't know you have to replace the batteries every so often, but there's actually more hidden costs than that. The hidden cost of charging an electric vehicle, nobody's talking about. This article says you won't likely be disappointed by your new eco-friendly vehicle. The majority of first-time electric vehicle owners are reluctant to go back to gasoline-powered cars. In fact, the popularity of electric vehicles is steadily on the rise, whereas almost 50% of the U.S. population is in support for phasing out gasoline cars completely. Did you hear what it said? I want to emphasize this article. 50% of Americans have fallen for this garbage. And they did a pound-by-pound comparison, if you want to put it that way. Monthly gasoline vehicle fueling cost for, a specific distance they set forth, $110. Whereas if you actually use a public electric vehicle charging cost, it's $150. So it's more expensive to charge your vehicle. But then they'll say, oh, if you can do this at home, it's only $60 for that same amount. And let's not even talk about the obvious, that it is very clear, all experts are saying that right now our power grid couldn't even handle the majority of Americans having electric cars. So even though it may be cheaper charging at home, it may not be possible. But here's something you have to take into account: the charger price and installation at home. If you have a level 1 charger, you can plug it into any 120 volt outlet, but it can take up to 20 hours to charge your car. Level 2 can charge it much faster, but it's about $3,500 for installation. Okay, so anyway, there's the first part of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm not really against electric vehicles, mind you. I like the technology. I'm such a tech head. I think it's cool stuff. And I think it's great they're bringing this out to the people. I'm all for a cleaner environment. But when they start pushing this and trying to push this because of climate change, that's where the problem comes in. Because, I believe we should be a free market economy. You want to make the prices of these vehicles low enough. You want to make it so we can put a charger in our home. Honestly, it'd be cool to charge up your car every day, commute to work, and never have to stop at a gas station again. Well, obviously, that's not what's happening here, because we see a political agenda in the whole situation. And the political agenda they're pushing is, of course, climate change. And how do I know this is political? A Nobel Prize winner is silenced by the IMF. What, the Impossible Mission Force? Maybe. After saying, I don't believe there's a climate crisis. Nobel laureate Dr. John Clauser disagreed with Biden's climate policies and was slated to present at a seminar on climate models to the International Monetary Fund. Oh, there's the IMF. I was just kidding. And what's his Nobel laureate? Look at this. A Nobel Prize in 2021 for his work in the development of computer models to track global warming, and won another for physics in 2022. This guy knows his stuff. And he uses this amazing thing called science to say that climate models are not taking into account the factor of visible light reflected by the cumulus clouds that cover the Earth, et cetera, et cetera. And then he publicly stated, I don't believe there's a climate crisis. And key processes are exaggerated and misunderstood by approximately 200 times. And this, I couldn't agree with more. As a scientist myself, he's a skeptic of climate change and is on the board of directors for a CO2 coalition, an organization that believes that CO2 is helping life on the planet. Yes, I've been saying this. Obviously, as humans, we cannot breathe in a substantial amount of CO2, but the amount we're talking about, the climate's not going to get anywhere near that as far as the amount of CO2 in our atmosphere. CO2 is vital for life on the planet. What type of life are we talking about? Plants. Plant life depends on the CO2. We breathe it out. They take in the CO2, breathe out oxygen, we breathe it in. It's a symbiotic relationship. So when we see CO2 rising, even if that's the case, happiness, plants, farms, all these things that actually grow vegetables and give us wood and stuff, thrives because of this. But even though he's an expert, even though he's a Nobel laureate, it doesn't matter because he has his speeches now canceled. Of course he does. And that's what we're getting at. It's not simply just a free enterprise or, one scientist who happens to be an incredible expert in the area says something alternately. We should have dialogue. We should look at alternate means. I mean, if it really came out to be that climate change was real and climate change was man-made, that's one thing. But what they do is they silence the opposition. And this whole thing, what does this have to do with electric cars? They try to claim electric cars are all about climate change, don't they? But when we see the amount of money being charged for electric cars, not to mention the batteries for them, not to mention the parts for those batteries coming from slave mines and all this crap, is it really more of a political standpoint? Or does this all come down to be big business? Because businesses jump right onto this huge bandwagon of, climate change, and let's ban gas cars, and be the first innovators in electric cars so we can sell them for $340,000 a pop. It's what it's all about. It's all about business. It's all about making money. It's all about these corporations becoming bigger corporations, becoming wealthier corporations, and of course the CEOs and officers of the corporations riding the coattails right along and becoming rich as well. Don't believe this is simply just political. I believe it is political. I believe it is about control. I really do. But The good old honest dollar isn't so honest anymore when it comes to these people who are pushing all this climate change garbage. So much so, when a Nobel laureate who knows his stuff better than anybody is snuffed out and silenced, and they cancel his different talks because, you know what, he goes against this norm. What kind of world are we in? This is not how America was founded, and this truly was not how science was founded. Well, keep prepping, my friends. Keep going, because you know what? If this head honcho when it comes to understanding physics and global warming is silenced, what's going to happen to you and me? Our preparedness depends, our life depends on our preparedness. We need to keep prepping and be ready for this, because if they're able to silence him, you know what? We're just peons in this. They're easily going to silence us too. So we have to be more self-sufficient and prep better now more than any time. We need to prep.